Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Welcome to the webinar on making a case for software product management. We have a lot to get through today, so without further ado, I am going to jump right into the material. I would first like to show you how you can interact during the webinar. So if you look here, there's a little widget that you can open apps, and a menu will open and you can either type in a question. There's also this showcase, and I've placed several links in there to relevant information like my blog, my site, a white paper you can download. So I hope you enjoy those. I guess before I get too much further, I am going to take a quick look. Make sure that my co-presenter Daniil is with me. Looks like Daniil is online. So indeed, we will get started. So my name is Greg Prickril. I've been doing software product management for about 15 years, primarily at really big shops. Microsoft, IBM, SAP. I've lived and worked in North America, South America, and Europe. I'm an American, and I'm currently living in Heidelberg, Germany. Big fan of Lean, big fan of Scrum, and of course, product management, and have implemented all three of those multiple times in different locations. Before we really define what product management is, we need to level set on a few terms. So the question is, what is a product? And guys, pardon me, I'm going to make sure that, wanted to make sure that the microphone is turned on. This is the first time we're using Hangouts On Air. So takes a little getting used to. What is a product? A product is a combination of goods and services that somebody develops to transfer commercial interest to somebody else. That's a very technical description. It comes from an organization called the International Software Product Management Association. I think it's a good definition. I will offer one with a little more detail in just a moment. A software product is simply a product that incorporates a significant amount of software, and the products that use software are growing all the time. If I buy something that has software in it, I may not even realize that I'm buying the software. We call that embedded software. And here is my key criterion for a piece of software becoming a product. A piece of software becomes a product when I deliver it in essentially the exact same form to multiple customers and then manage it over its lifetime. Let's contrast that with just a custom solution that I built for a customer and give it, deliver to them in a project. Once I have multiple customers, multiple stakeholders, I have to manage the life cycle of a piece of software from the time I first make it available until I withdraw it from the market. I need somebody now that has end-to-end perspective on the product. So now I all of a sudden have new requirements. I need a new role. There are a couple of quick fundamentals I would like to cover. We can look at almost anything in the world from either a functional or a technical perspective, and it turns out this is really important when I'm talking about software products. So the functional perspective is outside in. Think about a black box. I don't know what's in there. I know what goes in. I know what comes out. Example I always use is my laptop. I don't know what's inside of it. I have some idea, but I don't really understand it. It doesn't matter. I know I type on the keys. I put a DVD in. I know how it's going to react. Let's contrast that with somebody who's more technically oriented, the technical perspective. That's about implementation. If you talk to somebody that works at a PC store, they see a laptop in a much different way. They know what's inside it. They know about the processor and the bus and the video card and the sound card. So these are two different perspectives. I can look at one thing with these two perspectives. And the idea is that in software, it being a very technical area, On the product development team, we need to create this balance between these perspectives. If I'm too technically oriented, I may limit myself by what I think is technically feasible. I may pursue solutions that are technically interesting but aren't interesting to the market. I need this functional perspective that understands the product the way customers do. And then I need to build this healthy tension between them so that I'm understanding the market. I'm simply describing what it needs. Development or engineering, which we'll talk about later, is stretching themselves from this technical perspective to make sure that they can build what the market's expecting. You've probably heard this paradigm used. I've used it most of my career, the why, the what, and the how. We can look at any activity this way, certainly software product development. The why is my motivation for doing it. Usually that's for commercial gain in a software company. The what represents this functional perspective. What do I want to build? Without respect to how it gets implemented, what is it that I want? And then the how represents this technical perspective, the implementation. And it turns out, once again, when I look at software product development, these are important distinctions in terms of accountabilities. So what is product management? There are a lot of ways to describe it. The way I describe it depends typically on whom I'm speaking to. If I'm talking to an executive, I will say product managers execute corporate strategy, but at the product level. Most executive leaders will say, yes, I've got a corporate strategy. I've got products. The product manager is the linkage between those. He makes sure that the product has a strategy, a vision that supports the corporate vision. Product managers also orchestrate the activities of a lot of other functions, as we call them. So somebody needs to make sure that this vast or disparate group of professionals work together to create the best product possible. And I often characterize it, we'll talk about this more in just a moment, about getting the right thing on the shelf. So here's my definition of product management or product managers. I say product managers are strategic members of the product team, accountable for making sure the right product is made available to the right markets at the right time, and at a cost that supports business success. And there's a lot in there. So let's deconstruct it very quickly. The product team is this group of professionals who have to come together to build, deliver, maintain a successful software product over time. And product managers are not only members of that team, you could think of them as the hub. We are accountable for the success of the product. That means we're the single neck to strangle. If something goes wrong with the product, the person you go to is the product manager. The right product is simply the one that the market needs, that solves market problems. Right markets are the people who have the interest and the means to buy the product. If I have a product that allows people to create tax returns in the Netherlands, doesn't make a lot of sense to take that to market in Vietnam. Pretty obvious example, but the right market means I develop this product and I make it available to the people who are willing to buy it. And I talk about the cost because as a product manager, that's really our key lever. There are other folks typically who are really responsible day to day for selling the product, generating revenue, creating interest. We work with them closely, as I said before, but through deciding how much we're going to invest in development, we have, as product managers, much more control over the cost. And then business success. What defines business success depends on the context, what you're trying to achieve. I've worked on products where we were trying to make money and profit. I've worked on others where we were much more interested in adoption, and there are a lot of KPIs, and we'll talk about some of those in a moment. Here we revisit this why, what, and how, and this is how the accountabilities tend to shake out in mature software organizations. Software product managers are accountable for the why. You can think of that as vision and strategy. They're accountable for the what, which is a description of what the market needs to solve their problems. And development focuses on the how, implementing this what. And I've seen that work very well. You will see all kinds of combinations of these things, and it's a little oversimplified, but I think it's the right entry point, the right way to think about the key accountabilities when you're building a product. Here we have the ISPMA Software Product Management Framework. Provides an end-to-end view of what product managers do, with whom they interact. It helps to look at the bottom of the table And you'll see that columns 2 and 3 are called core SPM, core software product management. That has a strategic aspect and more an operational or product planning aspect. And you can see in there we do things like road mapping, release planning. On the strategy side, we're defining the positioning, we're defining the product. We may be uncovering requirements for an ecosystem. We may be managing intellectual property. We have to think about pricing, sourcing, where we're going to get software components, where we might get developers. So those are the core activities for a software product manager. On the left, if we look at the bottom again, we see participation. So this is strategic management, things that tend to be happening at the corporate level. And here product managers interact but don't typically drive those things, like defining corporate strategy, making portfolio decisions, managing innovation. And once again, looking at the bottom of the table under orchestration, we see a few columns that represent these other organizational functions. And the idea is these folks don't report to software product management. SPM is simply coordinating their efforts, defining a vision and a strategy that gets everybody pulling in the same direction. And you see engineering there, or development, marketing, sales, service, and support. So there are a lot of folks, and quite frankly, there are even more stakeholders. My experience is awareness of product management depends on where you are. I personally have seen it a little more mature. I don't know why, but in countries that speak English. So when I talk to people from the United States, England, and even India, I think there's a similar set of expectations. It's fairly clear in the United States. There's some variability, but in the United States, product managers tend to be very empowered. They're really defining the product. And my experience is so far in Central Europe, probably a little less developed. Later, Daniil will talk about Eastern Europe, and there we see maybe even a little less developed still. So the expectations of product managers depend on where you are in the globe. And a very common question that I get is, what is the relationship between product management and product ownership in Scrum? And it can be tricky. This is my position, and rest assured there are others. You can research those. But I see product ownership as a role that's defined as part of Scrum. And if you look at the Scrum guide, there may be 300 words dedicated to what a product owner does. I see product management as much broader. I think it's very difficult to be a successful product manager at the strategic level and also drive a development team as a product owner. Very often you see different people doing this once an organization starts to scale, let's say go beyond 2 or 3 teams of 10. And I've certainly seen that work. Product managers focus a bit more on the strategy. The product owners are a little more tactically or operationally focused, getting the backlog together and making sure that development is actually delivering the bits that we need. But these two have to work together, and very often that's done in a matrix organization. The good news is it's a great time to be a software product manager. Very exciting time. There's a lot happening with software. And we can almost say that everybody is in the software business these days. We find software, embedded software, for example, in toys, cars. I read recently that there are 100 million lines of code in the average car. We've got software on mobile phones, satellites, all over the place. And I'm sure you can think of other examples: washing machines, refrigerators. The most trivial piece of software that I've been able to identify so far comes from these Brita filter pitchers. They have this indicator on top that shows you when they need to be replaced. Very simple. I think it's just a timer. You can't see it here, but it shows stacked bars. And guess what? That's software. And as simple as it is, it has to be managed throughout its life cycle. Requirements have to be defined. And then somebody actually has to implement it. Who are the stakeholders for software products? There are a lot of them. And this is really important when we talk about product managers, because one of our key accountabilities is managing these stakeholders, understanding their requirements, prioritizing them. I think of stakeholders as being internal, behind the firewall, people who work with me. There are these other functions we talked about. There are other groups in the company that may use the software that I deliver. Executive leadership certainly has expectations of my product. Then we can look externally. If you read the literature, blogs, books, everybody's talking about customer, customer, customer. I come from the B2B space where that term in and of itself is almost meaningless. You really have to decompose it. Behind this term customer are all kinds of different users, administrators, There's somebody who has to make the decision to buy it. There are people who can influence them. So that's already a rich set of stakeholders. We also have to think about partners, if they help us deliver or help us educate people about our product. The government has regulations, there are market analysts, even our competitors can be thought of as a stakeholder in a sense. They have an interest in your product, namely that it fails in most cases. But for example, they're a key consumer of your roadmap. Your competitors are very hungry to see your roadmap so they can position against it. So I would make the argument that product management is very hard, very difficult. I think most of us on the call are doing it, and this should be very intuitive. You take a moment to think why it's so difficult. Part of it has to do with this technical and functional perspective. We've got to straddle those worlds, but keep our functional hat on. We have to influence all kinds of different people, marketing, sales. They're already very different. We have to influence engineering, and we have to communicate effectively with all these different audiences. So it's very common, in my career to have a meeting with the board, go have a meeting with quality, then maybe have a meeting with an individual developer, go into a workshop with a customer, all in the same day. And then what we really get paid to do is make the right investment decisions, and prioritizing is almost always multidimensional, very complicated. So we named the webinar Making a Case. So how can I build a business case to justify an investment in SPM? I said in Central Europe, for example, it's not quite as mature. So organizations are actually asking themselves this question. And the truth is, historically, it's been very, very difficult to do this, to come up with a solid quantitative business case that justifies product management. We could think about traditional KPIs. We can manage or measure product managers based on adoption or revenue, profitability. But there are some wrinkles there that need to be taken into account. Primarily, this idea of the shelf that I mentioned before. And whether it's software or physical goods, what you will find over time is that there are separate groups of people who become accountable for getting a product on the shelf, and it's typically another set of people who get it off the shelf. The sad truth is sometimes these people barely talk to each other. That's something I encounter very regularly in my consulting practice. Here you see the on-the-shelf functions: product management, engineering, quality. Marketing also gives us market insight. They also appear on the off-the-shelf side. These guys are accountable. Sales guys normally carry accountability for a quota. They have to sell the product. And of course, once it's sold, support and professional services have a role. So measuring product managers just based on revenue, for example, can be tricky because there's only so much influence they have over those things. And the truth is, somebody else in most organizations is really held accountable for that. I've played around with different approaches as I've worked with clients. It's beyond the scope of this call, but I came up with a very simple model that takes into account the quality of decisions that get made. And the idea is, with somebody really focused on the functional or business aspects of the product, you make better decisions. There's somebody that I respect a lot, Nils Davis. I'll send these slides out afterward. You can go look at his post. He makes a more general statement that a PM is worth 5 million, and you can deconstruct his logic. I think it's a bit tough to generalize, but the point is we can create models that help us think about the value of product management, but very difficult to create an airtight business case. So what we typically see are these more qualitative justifications, and they can be compelling. They can be very convincing. And one that I use very often is that if I look at big companies, they have product managers. Why? Have they been duped? Is it a hoax? If you go out to job sites, you can find that Google, Microsoft, Facebook, eBay, Oracle, some of these companies that have demonstrated business success over the long term have invested heavily in this role. You can see here how they talk about the role. It's critical to what they do. And the inconvenient question I have to ask clients sometimes is, if you have a different organizational structure, are you sure that you're better at developing and shipping software products than these companies? Are you really that much better that you don't need a similar approach? You shouldn't adopt a similar approach. So, food for thought, another qualitative argument. The other one comes back to the framework that we looked at, the ISPMA framework. And you have to ask yourself, we looked at those activities and who should do them. Are those engineering tasks? Is that what technicians should be focused on? Should executive leaders at the top of the company make all the decisions about strategy at the product level? I would say no. If we take another look at these activities, they're critical: road mapping, release planning, managing requirements, looking at the delivery model, defining the service strategy. All these things are important. And what these big companies have found, for example, is that unifying those under one role is very effective, giving somebody accountability for those things. So I asked the question when I sent out the invitation, why is product management critical for sustainable business success? And that's another question that it's very difficult to give this pithy, nice answer. So I typically respond to this with another series of questions. So you have to ask yourself, is accountability for business success of the product important? I would say it certainly is. And then you ask yourself, who should have that? Technicians? Executive leadership? I say somebody should be tasked with managing that at the product level. Is it important to have really an explicit vision and strategy, well-defined, that can be socialized and agreed upon? I would say it's important. Back to this idea that so many companies use this role. Is it just a coincidence? Ask yourself about stakeholders. We saw how many stakeholders they are. Is managing them just a nice to have, or is it really critical? I would say it's critical. And then, do you need this counterbalance to this technical perspective? In my experience working with a lot of clients, it's clear that you need somebody with this functional business perspective to keep development in check, to provide that balance, to make sure that they're making investments that are going to resonate in the market. So the idea is, if you answer yes to several of these questions, you've basically answered the question why product management is critical to long-term success, because that role typically is accountable or responsible or handles these issues. So what are some of the common challenges I see when an organization wants to implement product management? I've been through that a few times. Or they simply want to empower it, give it more authority. The first one that I find is staffing. It can be very hard to find good, experienced product managers, especially behind the firewall. You need to think about it. You may have to go outside to find folks. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And the truth is, an excellent technician, a development lead, won't necessarily make a good product manager. So you have to be careful. So staffing is typically a challenge. Another challenge is level setting the whole organization on expectations on these concepts, making sure that sales, engineering, support all understand the concept of a product, all understand what the accountabilities of a product manager are, what's the right set of expectations. And leadership is indispensable here. Leadership has to really help socialize these concepts and get buy-in from folks. A related challenge that I see quite a bit is this change management. So like any big change, here we're really changing accountabilities from people who may kind of guard them jealously. So we need really good leadership, and we need the people that are involved, product management, development, Q, to have very open and honest conversations and set very clear expectations. Failure to manage this change can really be a disaster, and I have to admit I've seen that happen. And then finally, some organizations struggle with rationalizing software product management in the context of Scrum. Product owners have been doing what they've been doing for a long time. Product managers may be doing things, maybe they haven't been so much defining the product, they've been spending more time supporting sales. So getting the right kind of virtual matrix together to support that, and just like with development before, segmenting these accountabilities or assigning the accountabilities can really be a challenge. So the question comes up, what can you do to maximize the chances for success? And there are a lot of things, and they're basically, you can think of these as kind of responses to the challenges we brought up. So the first thing you need is a very clear set of expectations that starts with a clear job description for product managers. You need to get the buy-in from these key stakeholders. And I always counsel my consulting clients to look for some quick wins. But you need to set clear expectations and then communicate them very broadly. Invest in staffing. That's one of your most important processes, bringing people on board. Consider this balance between the talent you have on board and the talent you need. And for some roles, you may need to go outside, and that can be very, very healthy to get people who have done product management in a mature organization, already know the set of expectations, have a lot of experience. Kind of cutting corners here tends to be a very bad idea. You should invest in professional development. You can't just change somebody's title, change their business card, and expect them to be effective. So you need to make sure they really have a conceptual understanding of the role. They can learn that from others. They can learn that from training. There's a lot of training available. I provide training, both presence and online. A lot of resources, a lot of blogs, a lot of books, but this is something that you need to really consciously manage, and that is making sure that product managers have the skills, develop these kind of core understanding of the concepts that they need. And this one is one that I see overlooked all too often, and that is investing in stakeholder engagement. That means actually talking to stakeholders like customers, particularly external stakeholders. So going out, speaking to economic buyers, speaking to end users, traveling, walking a mile in their shoes, being on site. So this isn't just an investment in time and effort, it's an actual investment in plane tickets and hotels, but will pay for itself. So to be an effective product manager, we really have to invest in stakeholder engagement. And that's something you can really do to increase the chances of SPM being influential and positively impacting the business performance. So those are my slides. I would now like to turn over control to Daniil, who will take us through some slides. He's going to talk about his experiences with software product management in Eastern Europe, Poland, for example. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Greg. So now I'm gonna share my screen. And while I'm doing that, I hope everybody can see me. Oh, well, can see my slides actually. So yeah, a few words about me. I'm an active product manager with like 5 years of experience under my belt. I work with different companies like in Central and Eastern Europe, in Poland, Germany, Belgium, and now in Netherlands. And today I want to share you some of my like observations with regards to what is the current product management state in this region, and some of the actually top challenges that product management are facing in Eastern Europe especially. So we start with the first one, which Greg is really brilliantly mentioned in the beginning of the talk, and it's a lack of understanding. And I see it's actually on two levels. And I see it as one of the most important problems of this region. So on the executive level, so on the top management level, we see that people still kind of don't get the concept of product management, its value, and it results in lots of problems. We start from like staffing problems, what people got the role, how the hiring process looks like. And then the empowerment issue comes in, like what do they really like, what kind of power do they delegate to those product managers, and that's one of part of the coin. And the other part is the execution level, and here again we talk about a bit of lack of understanding. And when somebody is like a fresh PM and just getting into the role and need to adapt of what his company is actually expecting of him, he sometimes forgets about like all the product management, important part of product management that happens, for example, before development. So here I explicitly mean, like, for example, a new organization that just adopting Scrum, so they hire in product owners. By Scrum definition, product owners needs to care about the backlog first and foremost, and that's what they're focusing on, sometimes forgetting that there are a lot of product management that should happen before that. Then we move to the second challenge, and I call this challenge a service approach. And you see it in Eastern Europe, where there are a lot of very good, very skilled technical workforce. There are a lot of developers, a lot of designers, and there are a lot of software houses that sell their services actually all around the world. And those and then they all kind of naturally apply the service approach. So the customer is always right, and they're just doing what the customer is asking them to do. And when those companies try to switch to the product approach, there's some inevitable problems appear with regards to, especially when somebody gets promoted internally to a product management role and tries to do product management, still having, let's say, in mind the service approach when the customer is always right. And we know in product management, if we just accept everything that customer wants, it might lead to, actually, it might hurt our products in the long term. And then the last thing is the challenge that I believe galvanized the previous two. And this is actually the lack of training and actually resources, localized resources in this region. So as Greg mentioned, the product management is pretty well developed in the English-speaking countries, and most of the materials for product managers are in English. And it creates a bit of a barrier for people who's not that fluent or familiar with this language to actually get the relevant knowledge. And when it comes to the training, I was doing it myself, trying to find some reasonable trainings in Eastern Europe for product management, and it was really hard to do. Actually, I failed to do that. It was impossible. So I believe this problem is very evident and needs to be fixed with the proper possibilities to get the knowledge from people who's experienced, practical, and then apply that knowledge in their day-to-day job. So that is it. Basically, there's only three things which I define as the top challenges. There are lots of other things, but for today, I believe those are the most important. So lack of understanding of C-level and execution level, service approach, and lack of training and collateral. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniil. Very interesting to see how things are developing east of here. Would be interesting to hear the participants, what your experiences are where you live and work. We now have some time per the schedule. We have about 10 or 15 minutes to answer questions. So as I showed you before, go to the little app icon, click on it, select Q&A, and you can submit a question. If we get enough questions, we can stay here till the top of the hour. In a few minutes, I'll take us through the last few slides of the presentation. But I gave folks the opportunity to submit questions when they registered, and somebody did that. And I think it was a very good question. So if you see in the question facility, what are the most important 3 skills for a great PM? Wow, there are a lot of things, a lot of ways that I could answer that. To me, the first skill, and this seems like an odd one, but the first skill is really knowing how to say no. So saying no is not easy. You have to get used to it. There's a certain way to communicate. There are certain ways to follow up. But saying no is something we don't like to do, and something as a product manager, if you don't learn to do, you will almost certainly fail. It starts with saying no to demand on your time. So you've really got to prioritize your effort, because there will always be multiples, 5 times more things than you can possibly do. And then, of course, saying no to stakeholders. They will pull you in a lot of directions. Sometimes your best customers will take you in a direction that's not in line with your vision. So understanding that you need to be able to say no, and then really figuring out how to do that effectively so that you maintain relationships, I would say is a very important skill. The next one is prioritization, very much related. We can talk about prioritizing investments, let's say features. So really being able to take these complex criteria, Is the market going to like this? Do my current customers like it? Is this for the customers that I want as opposed to the ones I have? Is it expensive? Is it risky? Is it feasible? Is it on vision? Is it what other product groups want me to do? So finding a very effective, transparent way to prioritize investments is really important, because there can really be internal wars over these investments. There can be big battles with stakeholders, including customers. So once again, it's not about just kind of shooting from the hip and being a really experienced person and deciding this is what we're going to do. You need to come up with a practice on how to prioritize things. I have a practice that I use. I will share that in a future webinar, but that would be the second one. So you need to learn how to say no, need to learn how to prioritize. And then the third skill is communication. Can't emphasize that enough. Being able to talk to a bunch of different people, being a very active listener, understanding what they want, knowing what they expect to get out of the conversation, what they expect to get out of you. So clearly talking to an exec the same way you would talk to a junior developer is not a particularly good idea. Same thing applies to talking to a big customer as opposed to maybe one of your big integration partners or something. So I would say that is the third skill that I would recommend that you develop. So saying no, prioritizing, and communication. And I see we have another question from Fernando. Wow, that's a tricky one. Where do you see software product management in 10 years? Ooh, I'm really not sure. I see in some cases product management almost at the breaking point. We looked at the, for example, the why, the what, and the how. Really driving the why and the what, two of those circles, is a lot of work for one person. And the feedback I get in talking to other product managers, my own experience working with clients, is that we are just simply overtasked. There's simply too much to do. So I see maybe in the future other roles developing. Maybe you could almost think of them as specialized roles of product management, where some people are considered more like product strategists. Some people spend more of their time on design tasks. So that could be kind of a convergence with UX to a certain extent. I think in general as a profession, the future is really bright for product managers. There is a lot going on. People understand the role much better now than they did when I started my career 15 years ago in product management. So I would say in the future, I see a lot more product managers. I think it'll go more mainstream, and globally there will be a similar set of expectations. And I see maybe some specialization, kind of what you see going on in UX today. You have designers, you have information architects. We see that umbrella decomposing into these different roles. And it wouldn't shock me if something similar happened with product management. Any other questions? I hope you're able to use the Q&A facility. I hope you figured that out. I don't see any now, so I will go through a few more slides and then we're done. If you would still like to ask a question, please post it. I can stay at least until the top of the hour and we can discuss it. And you may have a question that isn't necessarily related to exactly what we spoke about today. That's fine. Ask away. So give me just a moment. I'll share, take you through a few more slides. And we're awfully close to the weekend, right? So here were the questions. As a quick wrap up, software product managers define and execute strategy at the product level. Software product management is really hard. You get pulled in a lot of direction. Just managing stakeholders is already difficult. You also, as we saw in the framework, have to define the product, have to interact with things going on at the kind of corporate level. You have to orchestrate the activities of all these other disciplines. I think the ISPMA framework is a really good representation. Like anything that's concise, it's maybe a little incomplete, but gives a really nice picture, a great way to think about the profession. You have your core activities, you support or participate in what's going on at the corporate or strategic level, and then you orchestrate the efforts of others. The investment in software product management, whether that's starting out new, whether that's empowering them, can be very difficult to justify quantitatively with an airtight business case that says we will get, next year 450,000 euros of value out of this. There are a lot of compelling qualitative arguments. When we look at software companies that have had success over the long haul, all the ones I know of have product managers. And there are some differences in the role, but I would say there's probably more commonality than differences. And there are things you can do to increase chances. This is not roulette. This is not just gambling. There are steps that you can take as an organization, both at the leadership level, at the ground level, in terms of setting expectations, communicating. You can significantly increase the chances that SPM will have a highly positive effect on the business performance of your product. This is our first webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly have. Plan now is to do one of these roughly every month. I take a backlog approach to everything. I told you I'm kind of a lean and agile guy. Here are some things that I thought of. I've defined these key accountabilities. Think about prioritizing investments collaboratively with people like development. I've gotten a lot of questions in my courses, for example, on working with sales. I have a lot of thoughts there, but would love to hear your ideas. And we'll look going forward toward a mechanism that allows me to post things, have people vote, and we'll just take things like all good product owners or product managers in priority order. The next date that made sense was April Fool's Day, April 1st. It's serious. I really plan to do a webinar on that date and hope you will join us. Here's a real quick overview of the things I do. You can get a lot more information on my site. I do consulting, so I help organizations improve the maturity of their product management function. I can actually drive products. I do a lot of training, and I would recommend it even for experienced product managers to consider taking a training course. One that I offer, for example, is called Foundation Level, but it really lays out a nice model, a great way for thinking end-to-end about product management. And you can find a schedule on my site. I'm launching an online version, so if you can't travel for whatever reason, you can still take the course at home. You can get certified where you live, typically very close to where you live. And this year I'll start rolling out excellence level or advanced level. So if you're interested in advanced topics like orchestration or product strategy, there will be trainings there. And I do coaching one-on-one. So can't tell you how much I appreciate your participating today. It was great to get some questions. I will go back and see if we've had any more. And it looks like perhaps we have. So here we have a question. What are the key differences, if any, in doing product management for software products and X as a service product? Well, it depends on what that X is as a service. Is it software as a service? Is it really just delivering services themselves? Whoever asked that question, if you can type in another thing to help me clarify, I'll try to address that in a general way. And when I started teaching my classes, I focus on software product management. I assumed that 80% of what I was teaching, because I tend to take a fairly strategic approach, applies to almost any kind of product management. You've got to understand the problem space. You have to define the what. You've got to manage stakeholders. You've got to prioritize investments. You've got to participate in portfolio. So generally, most of it applies very broadly. Very funny, I had a student in class who came from a hardware company. They created machines that made paper pulp. He didn't know what a release was. When we started talking about releases, he raised his hand and asked me what a release is. But since then, I've also had students that work with services from telecommunications, for example. And the feedback I got was the things that they found in my course were universal. All these things need to be done. So I would say, let's say, depending, 70, 80% of product management can be similar. Realize some organizations focus on different things, and some organizations, especially outside of tech, product managers tend to focus a little bit more on marketing activities. If you look at my blog, I have a post about the 3 dimensions of software product management. Didn't have time to go through that today. That's something that I can cover in another webinar. I've also have a video blog, if I'm not mistaken. Look on my YouTube channel. So I would say most of product management applies regardless of the product. But to be effective, you typically have to have pretty good domain knowledge in the area where you're actually working. I hope that helped. How do you see product management's role as a driver in the lean world? Well, that's a great question. So having this business perspective is absolutely critical, and really understanding stakeholders, especially customers, is critical for lean. So for those who may not be aware, lean is a philosophy, came out of physical manufacturing. It's now being applied to software. I have a lot of thoughts on that. There's some interesting differences between manufacturing physical goods and manufacturing software. So you really have to have some fundamentals straight when you start thinking about lean. But the idea of lean, one of the ideas, is that I look at everything I'm doing, I determine and identify what creates customer value, and I also identify what does not create customer value. And the lean terminology for activities that don't create direct customer value is waste. Very controversial term, but it just means that, hey, what I'm doing, some waste you can't get rid of. What I'm doing needs to be done, but it's not something that a customer would pay for. So I need to manage it closely. I need to minimize it. So the implication is that by taking a lean approach, I will maximize and invest my time in the activities that create customer value and minimize the amount of time I spend on activities that don't create customer value. And the question is, who's the arbiter of what's valuable to customers? Who determines that? And I would say product managers have a huge role there. They're functionally oriented, business oriented. They need to understand the problem space. I'm very passionate or opinionated about that. So if we think about the fundamentals of lean, we need to understand customer value, and who better to figure that out, to figure out what customers value, what activities we are executing to create that customer value than a product manager. Lean is a huge topic. We could talk about it, that could be certainly another webinar, but that would be my going in position. That if lean tells me that I need to understand activities that create customer value, I need to understand that customer value. And as a lean organization, it makes a lot of sense to make somebody accountable for understanding what customers value. So here's another question. How do you keep fit as a PM? How do you educate yourself? What online sources do you follow, etc.? That's a great question because it's changing all the time. It's a very complex role. There are tons of things to learn. I can share with you what I do. One of the interesting things I do, here's an interesting insight, is that I tweet. And you think, how does that help you? Well, the fact is, I try to tweet 5 or 6 things a day. You can find my handle is @Prickril, and it forces me to actually go into the literature, and a really valuable tool that I've developed to help keep me up to date on a lot of topics is Google Alerts. If you don't use those, you should. You basically go in, you create an alert based on a search phrase. Every day, Google sends me resources that it finds on those things. So I do that on product management, Internet of Things, UX. I probably have 30 or 40 Google Alerts set up. So that's one thing I do. I look, just in general in blogs and so forth. I'm also a fairly avid reader. I try to keep that balanced. So right now I'm rereading the book on blue ocean strategy. There are great books on business models, on value propositions. Sometimes it's nice to look left and right. I read 2 months ago a really great book on sales. By the way, I have a site. I didn't put it on the last page. It's called SPM Resources, and it's a little bit stale, but there are huge lists of books and videos and things that you can look at. I also try to actively talk to people. I call it geeking out. So there are certain people that I really enjoy talking to about product management. I think they have interesting perspectives, and I seek them out sometimes for no other reason than to just talk about product management. That probably sounds really geeky, but I find it really enriching. I learn so much doing that. So those are some things you can think of. Look at what's going on. There are all kinds of blogs. I would try to read a book a month, you know, a chapter or two every couple of days. It's actually pretty manageable. Take time out of your day. You deserve to develop yourself. So take 15, 20 minutes, read a chapter in a book, and then talk to folks. If there are multiple product managers in your organization, develop a community and carve out time, an hour a month, where you just sit, have a backlog of topics, and do what I call geeking out on product management. I hope that helps. If not, chime in here in the questions. And let me scroll a little bit. I think I've gotten most of these. So where do I see it in 10 years? X as a service. Not sure if I answered that one. I hope I did a reasonable job. We talked about lean. We talked about staying fit in terms of skill set, knowledge about product management. And of course, we talked about the 3 most important skills. So unless there are other questions, I will sign off in just a moment. One more slide I will show. There will be just a little bit of follow-up. So this session is recorded. You can follow the same link. It takes a little while to process once the meeting's over, but you can watch it again. Would love it if you would send it to folks in your network that you think might be interested. I'll make available a PDF of the slides to all the folks that registered. If you're listening and you didn't register, go to the registration form and just give me your name and email address, and I'll send that to you. I don't request a lot of information. I'm not a spammer. And I would love to hear your ideas. You have all my contact information. You can contact me via the site, via email. You can tweet me. You can find me on LinkedIn. Would love it if you find me on LinkedIn, and would love to hear your ideas for future webinars. So actually, I think I failed to share the screen, but I don't think it was that important. Any more questions? No, I think we're done for the day. So thanks, everybody. It was a real pleasure meeting you through the Google Hangout. I hope you will visit us the next time we do a webinar on April 1st, and hope to hear from you in the meantime.